Everyone, thank you so much for your interest and your support in OncoSil Medical. Today, we're pleased to walk you through our latest presentation. Nigel Lange is the CEO and Managing Director. The code is OSL, and I'll pass the floor to Nigel. At the conclusion of the presentation, you are welcome to submit your questions in the chat box. I will then read them out and Nigel can answer them accordingly. So over to you, Nigel.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks, Julia. Good afternoon and welcome to this update on latest developments at OncoSil. Very much appreciate everybody joining. I'm sure it's nice and warm where you are because where I am at the moment it's -3. So enjoy the beautiful weather. Standard disclaimer. So what's been happening at OncoSil over the past few months? So we continue to hit material operational targets. We've had some significant achievements against strategy in the financial year to date. So on the operational side, we've expanded our global presence via exclusive distribution agreements. We now have approval to move forward on the GBA fully funded clinical trial in Germany. We've received conformity certificates in the EU and the UK, which means the removal of post-marketing restrictions that enable us to accelerate market access and streamline commercial operations. In Italy, we've just added another institution called the Nazionale dei Tumori in Milan, and this strengthens our EU footprint. This is a very important center with a very well-known HPB or hepatopancreatic biliary surgeon leading the program there. Lastly, but not least, both clinical trials that are active, TRIPP and PANCOSIL, have exceeded the 75% recruitment rate. On the financial side, revenue from commercial sales during the first 6 months of 2024 to the end of December 2024, the first half of the year were $4.02 million. The company had a cash balance of $8.46 million and cash and equivalents at December 31st, 2024. And we were able to complete a capital raise, which strengthened our balance sheet of $10.93 million before costs. We've also received a $1.05 million R&D tax rebate, which we received in January of 2025. So in detail, recent operational achievements and what do they really mean for the strategy moving forward. So the GBA approval for the testing of a new treatment method, endoscopic injection implantation of P32 labeled microparticles in unresectable, locally advanced pancreatic tumors, enables the fulfillment of a fully funded phase 3 CED. CED means coverage with evidence development trial. The OncoSil device used in the trial will be reimbursed. Now, why is this trial important? It's important because it will, when successfully completed with a positive outcome, will mean that the treatment will get into the mainstream use in Germany, which means it will be reimbursed and it will be included in the German treatment guidelines. So the authorization by the German Institute for Hospital Remuneration System, or InEK as they are known for short, now have 120 German hospitals that are able to negotiate funding for the OncoSil device. And this really underscores the growing recognition of the OncoSil device in the German healthcare system and further highlights, the unmet need that we see not just in Germany, but all over the world in pancreatic cancer. as we've stated in earlier presentations, not much has moved in this indication in the past 4 decades. So this is a very significant achievement. In terms of medical device regulation, or MDR, the EU certification from BSI, we first received the UK certification in October of 2024, and now more recently we've received the EU certification. This is an important step, and I'll highlight what this means a little later on in the presentation. So what are the next steps for clinical trials? Well, we want to get these completed. TRIPP right now sits at a rate of 78% recruited, and PANCOSIL currently sits at 80% recruitment. So let's delve a little bit more into detail about what a fully funded trial in Germany entails. We started this journey, and many of you may recall in prior presentations, we started this journey in March of 2022, where the Federal Joint Committee, or the GBA, recommended that a fully funded trial take place. Well, it took 2 years, 2.5 years basically. In October 2024, the GBA approved the OncoSil device to move forward in a trial. So in February of 2025, the list of German hospitals by InEK was just published, and we see 120 German hospitals that are actually in a position to negotiate for funding for OncoSil. What happens from this point forward? Well, the GBA are in full control of the timeline. It's a hands-off situation for OncoSil. The GBA will go out for a tender for a CRO who will run the trial and manage all of the interaction with the participating centers. And what I think is important to point out here, in the red box, the top 10 German pancreatic centers performed 2,000 complex surgeries in 2023. These are our primary targets for commercial adoption. Not only commercial adoption, but these sites will most assuredly take part in the GBA trial. So where we started off back in 2022, there were 25 hospitals that were able to negotiate, were in a position to negotiate for funded. Well, what happened was the German statutory health insurance has said, well, we're not going to negotiate until we get a positive decision from the GBA. So now that we have the positive decision, these hospitals are in a much stronger position, and we've seen going from 2024 to 2025, we've gone up 43%. So what does that mean? It really underscores both the demand in Germany and the growing recognition of the device and how important it is within the German healthcare system itself. Medical device regulation, or MDR certification. So now what we see is a lifting of the post-marketing restrictions, which we have highlighted to you in the past, was in the form of the Osprey registry. And now that's no longer needed. But what will occur here is that this will really result in accelerated market access, because the registry required that every hospital in Europe and the UK wishing to use the OncoSil device needed to obtain ethics approval. So ethics approval meant a protracted process, anywhere from 6 to 12 months. The average is around 6 to 7 months to obtain ethics approval. And now that's no longer needed. So the commercial team can purely focus on selling efforts and interaction with the relevant stakeholders from the medical community side to move the treatment forward. What does this mean in terms of cost for the company? It means that we will save up to 2 million euros over the next 3 years in ethics approval fees or ethics submissions and patient recruitment related costs. So the only thing that hospitals now need is the necessary infrastructure to do the treatment. And they, of course, need the license for P32 or phosphorus 32. That needs to be on the site license, and that we need to have as a legal formality to enable us to ship the product. So I think it's safe to say that this milestone really highlights the device's robust safety profile. It reduces the regulatory burdens that we've experienced over the past 3 years, and it really does streamline market access. And last but not least, I think it's important to note here that this gives us the ability to resubmit the application to the Therapeutics Goods Administration, or TGA, in our home market of Australia. So where are we in terms of the ongoing clinical trials? We've talked a lot about the TRIPP and the PANCOSIL trial. So the objective of TRIPP was really to prove that the addition of FOLFIRINOX chemotherapy in combination with the OncoSil device is safe. Why FOLFIRINOX? FOLFIRINOX happens to be the backbone chemotherapy that is used in Europe, and it also happens to be the chemotherapy on its own that shows better overall survival when compared with gemcitabine plus or minus nab-paclitaxel, which is where our current approval resides. So once the TRIPP study has completed and we have followed the last patient in needs to be followed for 7 months. We will submit all of the data from the study to BSI in the hopes that we will get this added to the label. And we don't see any reason why this cannot occur. So right now, we're sitting at a rate of 78% recruitment. That means 62 out of 80 subjects. And this past month has been a banner month. This has been the busiest month for recruitment into that trial. PANCOSIL is important because it gives us access to a wider range of end user to administer the product. This will be done by interventional radiology using CT guidance or ultrasound guided radionuclide therapy using the OncoSil device in patients with LAPC. This methodology of administering the treatment is so far anecdotally, we don't have the results yet, but anecdotally we can tell you it's safe. It doesn't take a lot of time. It's between 15 and 20 minutes. Patients are consciously sedated. They don't have to undergo general anesthesia. So it does actually somewhat enhance the safety profile as well. And we look forward to that moving the technology in various other locations within Europe. And what we find is that there are regional differences. There are some hospitals in some areas of various countries where the treatment will be performed by endoscopists using ultrasound, and in others, it will be interventional radiology delivering the treatment or administering the treatment percutaneously under CT guidance. So in summary, the GBA approval enables fully funded revenue positive trial. Revenue positive, why is that? Because the statutory health insurances are required to pay for the OncoSil device used in the trial. So in effect, it's a revenue positive study for us as an organization. So what are the next steps that the GBA have to perform? They need to put out a tender for a CRO, which means that at that point, once a CRO is selected, we'll have the final clinical trial protocol design, and then many of the hospitals that have received the NUB application that wish to participate in that study will be informed as to how to go about enrolling their institution. It's safe to say that not all 120 hospitals that I've mentioned before will be able to perform the treatment, but certainly we believe in terms of participation in the study, we anticipate that between 30 and 40 hospitals would be participating in the trial. So next major point is the medical device regulation certification from BSI, and that's something that I mentioned that the commercial team will take advantage of because that streamlines the process for commercialization and provides greater market access. And the next steps for our regulatory department is to prepare the submission. As a matter of fact, they've already started the submission process with TGA, and there are two scenarios here. The first scenario is TGA may approve in 4 weeks after receiving the final dossier, or they may, if they select an audit, approve within about a 6-month period. So, and then to close out, we would like to obviously see, both studies completed as soon as possible. We anticipate full recruitment in the TRIPP study by the end of Q2 of this calendar year, and we anticipate that PANCOSIL will see full recruitment by the end of Q1. I would like to thank the entire team at OncoSil for all of their dedication and hard work. It's been a long road. The work that went into the completion of the MDR filing, I can safely say, was in the thousands of hours and required input from a lot of people. Full credit for the German team to continuing to pursue opportunities in Germany, and the 120 hospitals, the German team together with our Director of Health Economics and Reimbursement Market Access, their dedication has ensured that we at least will get the best participation from the German sites in the upcoming clinical trial. So that's it for the presentation, and I'm very happy to take questions from everyone.
Thank you so much, Nigel. Our first question here is from James Randall. What expectations would you have for the number of paid treatments this year? Do I recall it was 30,000 euro per treatment, or was that US dollars?
No, 30,000. I've never mentioned that number, and 30,000 US dollars. I've never mentioned that number either. Look, it's difficult for me to give you an exact number of where we would be by the end of this calendar year. The more sites that we have becoming active, the easier it is to actually begin to forecast. So Look, there's always a lag between a hospital treating their first patient because they typically want to see how the patient does, how they manage that patient. You know, does the patient have pain? Do we have to do something in addition when we're managing these patients? So there's always sometimes it can be a 1 or a 2 month lag in between when the next patient is actually treated. So the more hospitals that we start to get on board will make it easier for us to forecast. And I don't want to make any forward-looking statements, so you can appreciate that. But no, the number that you've given in terms of what the revenue per dose is slightly higher than what it actually is in the European Union and the UK.
Thank you, Nigel. James has got a subsequent question here. What is the cost per treatment, even just ballpark?
Cost per treatment in ballpark, in the UK, it's roughly £27,000.
Mm-hmm.
In Europe, it's roughly 27 to 28,000 euros.
Okay, thank you. Now we've got a question from Brad McMaster. Is the device single use? If not, how many procedures can be performed per device? In total, approximately how many devices have been supplied?
The device is a single-use device. So that's the way it's licensed. That's the way the approval has been granted. So how many devices have been used? Well, we've done over 200 treatments so far in use, both clinically and in the trials.
Very good. Thank you so much, Nigel. I've got a question here. We've got lots of questions. Okay, Justin. Justin has asked, how many different sites have completed their first procedure on a commercial basis? And is this number expected to increase this quarter? And if so, by how much? And how many have completed their third treatment using the device?
Could you repeat the first part of the question, please?
Justin would like to know how many different sites have completed their first procedure on a commercial basis.
Well, I can tell you that between Spain and Italy on a commercial basis, we have now about 18 centers that have completed their first commercial treatment. There's certainly 3 in Italy. The fourth is just about to start. And in Spain, they continue. So many of the sites in Spain have done more than their first commercial treatment. So as you know, most of you will recognize from earlier presentations, Spain has been the first country to come out of the blocks. And again, just going back to the point I made about the lifting of MDR, now we have 3 hospitals in Portugal that are ready to start. And they just didn't want anything to do with the registry. So now they're ready to start. And these are 3 very important, and I would say one of the 3 of the busiest hospitals in Portugal that treat pancreatic cancer. I'm sorry, I need to add one other site, and that's the site in Greece. So Israel as well, there's another site. So really we're at about 20 active commercial sites at the moment.
Thank you so much. And his subsequent question for Justin was, is this number expected to increase this quarter? And if so, by how much?
Yeah, that's the plan, Justin. I mean, we need to start showing quarter-on-quarter growth. One of the most important milestones that we would like to be able to check off very soon is the first commercial treatment of a German patient. So we hope that's going to happen.
Great. Thank you so much, Nigel. I've now got an anonymous question. So it's a 2-pronged question. Is the GBA trial a randomized controlled trial that would be acceptable to the FDA for the use of the OncoSil device for any indication? So that's the first
It is it is a randomized control trial. I'm happy to say that it is, because it is designed to ensure that there is sufficient evidence that enables the product to be routinely reimbursed in Germany. And it also means that it will be on, because it is a phase 3 trial, and if the trial is positive, which we assume it will be included in the German guidelines. And yes, of course, we'll have the ability to use that data from that trial in other jurisdictions, including FDA, including France, including submitting this data to NICE in the UK as well.
Great. Do you have an update on the FDA for bile duct submission?
That is an ongoing process. We are just in the process of reevaluating some data in response to a couple of questions by FDA. So that is ongoing. I can't give you a specific timeline yet, but we're making headway. And some of the data that we had submitted, they had some questions. So we've decided to go back and reanalyze the data and present it in a different format.
Okay. Sanderwood Capital has asked a question. Do you have a timeline for approval and entry into USA and China?
USA and China? No, I don't have a timeline on that. China hasn't been a focus for us at the moment. Obviously, we think that the HDA is still the most expedient way to gain entry into the US market. But we need to get the panel to agree that what we've submitted is now sufficient. And once that happens, then it's a relatively short process once they've agreed.
Thank you so much, Nigel. Anonymous question here. For Q3 revenue, are we on track to beat Q2 sales?
That's a bit of a forward-looking statement. That certainly is the target. So the target is to show quarter-on-quarter growth, and that's all right.
Thank you so much. James Randall's just looking for a bit of clarification on the price of the device. He is looking for some clarification if it's in pounds or euro. And then he's
Well, in the UK, we sell in pounds. So I think the question was asked, James, I'm not sure if it was you that asked the question about
It was James, yes.
Okay, so the entire treatment cost. So it's about 27,500 pounds in the UK. That includes all of the associated procedures of administering the device. And in Europe, it's between 27 and 28,000 euros.
Okay. James, feel free to send me an email at the end of this meeting, or Nigel, and we can give you some further clarification if it's unclear. Okay, another anonymous question here. What is the timeline for funding to come to OncoSil from the GBA trial following negotiations with insurers for funding?
The funding doesn't come to OncoSil. The funding goes to the hospital. OncoSil does not engage in negotiating with the statutory health insurances. That's done on a per hospital basis. And it's not done by the medical staff of the hospital. It's done by the finance staff of the hospital. They are the ones that are responsible for negotiating with the statutory health fund. And remember, there are 115 statutory health funds in Germany, but not all of them take part in the negotiation process. Negotiations are typically handled by some of the larger, more prominent statutory health insurances. So there's always a lead that is responsible for all the negotiations and acts on behalf.
Thank you so much, Nigel. Michael has asked a question here. Will Germany treatments start next week?
Next week? I can't say that for certain. Look, they are, we have some sites that are looking for patients. So I'm hopeful that we'll see something by the end of this quarter from Germany.
Thanks, Nigel. Anonymous has asked, when do you expect OncoSil to break even?
Yeah, that's a difficult question to answer at this particular point in time. I think I can best answer that once we have, additional sites on board and we get German sites active. I think it will be much more appropriate for us to make that prediction once we have more activity across all sectors, and particularly Germany, because it is the largest market in Europe. So it's difficult for me to tell you at this point in time, but I would say, hopefully we'll come close by the end of this calendar year. We'll come close, but I don't believe that we'll hit break even by then. But we'll be close.
Thank you so much. Martin has asked, what are some of the first hospitals to use the new administration of OncoSil after the PANCOSIL trial?
Well, there'd be a list of them. I mean, there would be many of the German hospitals would do this using percutaneous application. Case in point would be the largest hospital in Germany, which is Charité in Berlin, which is a 3,000 bed hospital. All of the biopsies in this particular hospital are done by interventional radiology. So, they certainly would be one of the early adopters to use the PANCOSIL device and deliver it percutaneously. So we would see a change probably in Turkey as well. We'd see a change in Italy with more sites. We're not, one of the things I just want to make clear to everybody is we're not abandoning the use of endoscopic ultrasound.
Mm-hmm.
Both methodologies will be used once the percutaneous is approved. Both methodologies will be on the label, and we're catering to a much wider set of users by offering it to both.
Thanks,
I
Nigel.
hope that answers the question.
We've got plenty of questions here today, which is great, and a very robust turnout. So thanks, everyone. Sanderwood Capital has asked a subsequent question. Will the device be able to be used for treating additional types of abdominal cancers? And is there a lengthy approval process for this? It's a good question.
Well, because we've got all of our data resides in pancreatic cancer. So if we wish to treat other solid tumors, and, in answer to your question, yes, I mean, we have to walk before we can run. So I think, we concentrate our efforts in establishing a solid footprint in pancreatic cancer first. But, it's a very good question, because there are other solid tumors where we could perhaps use the OncoSil device, but that will require substantial investment.
Yes.
Via clinical trials to prove that, we can treat other tumors in a safe manner. Mm-hmm. So, this device was used very early on in liver, but, at the moment, are we interested in liver? I don't know. It's a relatively crowded space with Yttrium-90 technology being used quite extensively in this, in liver indications. But I mean, there are areas of huge unmet need as well. So glioblastoma, for example, I mean, there isn't much that works in this indication. So I'm not, saying anything out of school here, but there are areas of opportunity that we will investigate.
Great. Thank you. Okay, lots of questions here. Have there been further discussions regarding potential partners or joint ventures or licensing arrangements for the OncoSil device in any jurisdictions?
There have been, but I'm not at liberty to disclose at this point.
Mm-hmm.
Suffice it to say that there are ongoing discussions, and we'll keep the market apprised if anything significant develops.
Great, thank you so much. Subsequent questions from our anonymous friend. What would you expect the growth margin to be longer term? How many doses are required to break even?
Well, we just, I spoke a little bit about that. I can't give you an exact number, but I think it's at the moment, the number of doses required to break even, is reasonably high, and that's because we have a high cost of manufacturing. But if we are able to lower that cost, and I think we've stated publicly that we are setting up our own manufacturing facility, that will significantly reduce our costs and increase our gross margin. So we're looking forward to that, because I think that's something that's really necessary that we can be in control of. So we've started some work in terms of validation in the new facility, and I think we'll have a much better idea. So I think if we're able to improve our gross margin through our own facility by at least 15 points at the time we flick the switch, that's very significant for us. And I think we'll just continue to see that margin grow. And once we achieve economies of scale out of the new facility.
Okay. When do you expect the GBA trial to begin following negotiations between hospitals and funding bodies?
The GBA trial, I cannot give you a prediction on that. I mean, I would have liked to have predicted that, back in 2022, that the approval process would take 6 months, but it didn't. It took 2.5 years. So we're not in control of that. It's GBA's own timeline, but what we will do is continue to communicate with them. We don't want, we wouldn't want to see paper shuffling and things going sideways. So I think this is something that needs to remain top of mind with GBA. Let's remember, we're not the only technology that they would be moving forward with. There are other projects on their books as well. So, but it's important for us, together with our other partners who are advising here, that we remain active in our communication. And further to that, what I can tell you is that in the middle of March, we will be having a German ad board comprised of the leading German physicians involved in the treatment of pancreatic cancer. And they will be from the different specialties of medical oncology, HPV surgery, gastroenterology, nuclear medicine, endoscopy, interventional radiology. And we'll get a position paper that will help to clearly define what the study design should look like. And this group hopefully will independently submit this to the GBA for consideration.
Excellent. Thanks, Nigel. Plenty of questions. We've got another anonymous one. When do you expect the first patient in the UK to be treated?
Patients have been treated in the UK under the trial. The UK actually, their participation in the TRIPP study has been very good. So patients are being treated in the UK. Now that we've had the restriction lifted, we anticipate that we should start to see private patients being treated. And as everyone knows, we've stated publicly that BUPA have approved the OncoSil device for reimbursement of the treatment by Bupa patients, but that needs to be negotiated individually with Bupa by each hospital. So each hospital will submit a package price, if you will, to Bupa independently and then gain separate approval. So it's not a blanket approval across the country because every hospital has a different cost structure. But, my anticipation is that if everybody is within the same range, then there's no reason that they shouldn't be approved.
Okay. Another question here about the market opportunity. What is the size of the market in dollar terms and the jurisdictions you would enter initially in the next year or two?
I think we tend to look at this on a penetration basis. So, how much of if the market is valued at X, so let's say the market is valued at, for example, there's a market that is valued at 200 million euros, for example. We tend to look at this on a penetration. So how much, and if it's valued at $200 million, our indication represents 35%, which is locally advanced pancreatic cancer. So 35% of 200 million is 70 million euros. And, what penetration can we gain? Can we do a 1% penetration? Can we get a 5% penetration? Can we get 10% penetration? So it depends on each individual market and, the hoops that we have to jump through to get to that. So to just give you a number off the top of my head, I can't do that at the moment. But happy, if you send it an email and we can break that down a little further.
Okay, I've got a question here from Michael. How far along is Saudi Arabia and South Korea?
South Korea, we've started some regulatory work. Our regulatory department under Nicole Gaddy has started that work already. So we do know that in South Korea, we are likely to have orphan status, which is a positive for us. Saudi Arabia, we don't anticipate having to wait too much longer for the regulatory process to be finalized. The month of March is a religious holiday, so not much is going to happen there. But I suspect that we could see something closer toward the end of calendar Q2 in terms of an approval in Saudi Arabia.
Okay. He also has a subsequent question, Michael. When is broker coverage starting again?
Well, we've had some conversations around that, and we're hopeful that we will get broker coverage shortly. It's in discussion.
Yep. Thank you. Robert Lynch has a question. Is the underlying IP, so the patents, was owned by a third party in the UK? Is this still the case? And I assume a royalty would be paid to that party.
Correct. That's absolutely correct.
Okay.
Yeah, and that is, those royalty payments are something that we do make every year. Correct.
Great. All right. We've got a lengthy one here from Justin. There are at least 51 sites, and I would like some clarity on average commercial outcomes and timelines for each site. Can you please provide some further clarity on the commercial timeline for when a hospital first uses the device to when they start using it regularly? And what is your general expectation of how many procedures a site would do per annum once they start using the device?
Well, okay. So let's go back and let's break this question down. Julia, if you could just ask the first question again.
It's quite lengthy, yeah. So, okay. So there's 51 sites. He would like some clarity on the average commercial outcomes and timelines for each site, each of those 51 sites.
Well, the average, that's a difficult thing to predict because all hospitals are different. Some are bigger, some are smaller. Some have different catchment areas. So, you could say, for example, we have a number of hospitals in the city of Madrid, but that doesn't say that, that they're all the same. So some are important, some are more academic than others. They tend to focus more on clinical trial patients and less on commercial patients. And that's why we have more than one hospital in Madrid. The same thing holds true for Valencia in Spain. So, as I mentioned before, there is a time lag between when a hospital treats their first one or two patients and they go on to treat subsequent patients. And that's because the hospital wants to ensure that they can do the procedure safely. We've trained them, they're all professionals, but there's always a drop before they start to ramp up. So that can sometimes be 2 or 3 months. And that's very typical. I've lived through this in a prior life as well, because physicians want to know how they should be managing these patients. Do the patients get, do they get pain? Do they get nausea? Do we need to keep them in the hospital, longer than overnight? Are they in the hospital for 2 nights, or are they in the hospital for 1 night? I mean, in the case of PANCOSIL, for example, these patients now are being discharged on the same day. So it's going to be done as an outpatient patient treatment in the Netherlands, because they are comfortable that they can send the patient home on the same day once they've ensured that the patient has no bleed, and they've captured the post-implantation image on SPECT. Then if they're satisfied, they can send the patient home if the patient feels fine. So again, I don't want to paint every hospital with the same brush, because that wouldn't be, you can't make any assumptions from that, because they're all different.
Okay.
The next part of the question?
Yep. He would like some further clarity on the commercial timeline for when a hospital first uses your device to when they start using it regularly.
Okay, so
your expectation on
I
how you
think I've answered that already. Yeah. I believe I've answered that already. There's always this lag period. So once you've treated, so it's usually 2 to 3 months before they start to pick up again. And they start to treat patients on a regular basis.
Okay, so we've got another anonymous question here, and it's about funding. Shareholders have been very patient with providing funding and support to OncoSil over a period of a long time. When do you expect shareholders to see some sort of acceptable return to be delivered that does not rely on shareholder funding?
Well, I'm hoping that we can get closer to that point by hopefully, Q1 of next calendar year. So I think, once we start to see break even, that I think we can start to see some shareholder return and some self-fund activities through revenue generation, rather than going back to shareholders and asking for more money.
Okay. I've got a few other questions here. The outlook for the next year looks very positive. However, the share price doesn't reflect that. Is this due to hostile corporate activity?
That's hard to say. Yeah, the share price, of course, is disappointing. It should be much better than that based on what we've achieved so far. So it's difficult to say whether we can actually put it down to hostile corporate activity or not. There are various things that have happened that perhaps have affected the share price negatively, but I think we're in a position where we'll be able to turn this around.
Thank you so much, Nigel. I've just got one more here. When do you expect the timeline of it? So it's regarding a timeline. So when do you expect they're looking for a timeline, public reimbursement to occur for the use of the OncoSil device in Europe and other jurisdictions?
Yeah, that's a very interesting question, and each reimbursement body has different requirements. So reimbursement is typically granted when you've got randomized data on a much broader scale. So when you're talking about reimbursement the way we're seeing it now, it's on a smaller scale, and they're more about individual negotiations. So in the case of Spain, hospitals going out to individual hospital tender, even though there's nothing to tender against because we're an N of one. And that's more about how we're going to operate in places like Italy, and Spain, and their hospital budgets that they come out of, or hospital tenders, and it'll be the same thing based on the negotiations that the German hospitals do with the statutory health insurances. Wider or broader reimbursement requires the completion of a phase 3 randomized trial where you're comparing the OncoSil device, whether it's plus or minus chemotherapy. In our case, it's with chemotherapy compared to something else. So you need a comparator. And if we show evidence that we are superior, then we would get into treatment guidelines. Typically, what one needs, you need a phase 3 trial with evidence proving that you are superior to the current standard of care. And once you can establish that, then you can develop health economic models which can be presented to payers for approval. And that's that will result in a much broader adoption of the technology. But as I said, not every jurisdiction is the same. So France may require something different than NICE in England, TGA, and it's not TGA, by the way, for reimbursement in Australia, it's MSAC, and they will require something different. And they're probably much closer to wanting the same thing as NICE in the UK, for example. So it differs. But in the US, it's somewhat different again. So, the first instance in the US would be CMS approval, which is the Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services. And that's a little bit different. They may not. So with an HDE, which we're applying for, we don't need a randomized trial for CMS to get reimbursed, for example.
Thank you so much,
That
Nigel.
answers the question.
Thank you so much. Thanks, everyone. We're just coming up to an hour, so we've got a number of additional questions. So feel free to email Nigel at the address on the screen. My email is julia@thecapitalnetwork.com.au. We've tried to answer as many of your questions as possible. That's all we have time for now. But if we haven't addressed anything, don't hesitate to email Nigel or myself, and we'll come back to you. Thank you so much, everyone, for your interest and your questions.
Thanks, everybody. The questions have been great, and
so
onward and upward.
Thanks, everyone, and have a great afternoon.